Hello, everyone, and welcome back to our virtual Mishnah Berurah here. Freilichen Chanukah, everyone. We are holding in Mishnah Berurah Chelik Aleph, and we are continuing to learn Hilchos Krias Shema. We'll be learning today in Yotze Hashem, Daf Tzadik Gimel Amid Beis, as well as a very nice piece of Tzadik Dalet Amid Aleph, because it's all of a piece. It's all part of one conversation, one inyan, a beautiful sugya of mitzvah צריכות kavana. Okay, so let's pick up here on Tzadik Gimel Amid Beis, bottom line in the Shulchan Aruch, Siman Samach Sif Daled. Says the Mechaber, Yesh Oimrim she'ein mitzvahs tzrichos kavana. There are those shittas that hold that ein mitzvahs tzrichos kavana, mitzvahs do not need kavana. This is brought down from Tosfos Rabbeinu Yonah. Now, we're going to have to see exactly in the Mishnah Berurah what is the question over here of mitzvah tzrichos kavana or not. What kavana is it that we're speaking of? But right now we have over here a yesh omrim she'ein mitzvah tzrichos kavana. You don't need intent in order to be mekayim mitzvahs. The yesh omrim, on the other hand, we bring down here from the Bahag and from the Rush, the yesh omrim she'tzrichos kavana. There are those that say that mitzvahs do require intent in order for you to be yotze a mitzvah. And what is that intent, says the Mechaber? Lotzeis ba'asiyas oisa mitzvah. You have to have kavana to be yotze the mitzvah. Okay. And the Mechaber concludes this and he says, v'chein halacha. Using a different setup over here, so I have to fiddle around over here with the technology to make sure everything is coming out right. The Mechaber says, v'chein halacha, and that is the halacha. The halacha is that mitzvahs tzrichos kavana. Okay, now let's take a look here at the Mishnah Berurah, Tzadik Gimel Amid Beis, Mishnah Berurah Ois Katan Zayin, about maybe a quarter of the way down in the Mishnah Berurah. Says the Chavetz Chaim, Yesh Omrim. The first Yesh Omrim that we have over here is the Yesh Omrim she'ein mitzvahs tzrichos kavana, the Yesh Omrim that says that mitzvahs, you do not require intent in order to be yotze a mitzvah. What does that mean? Says the Mishnah Berurah, Da, you should know, the lefi hamispar min ha-poskim, according to what we see explained in the words of the poskim, shnei kavanos yesh lemitzvah. There are two different kavanos that we talk about when we talk about having kavana to be yotze a mitzvah. Achas kavanas halev la mitzvah atzma. One kavana that we speak about is the kavanas halev, the kavana that you have in your mind on the specific mitzvah, on the mitzvah that you're being mekayim, on the maisa mitzvah. What does that mean? Well, we'll see in a minute. Vishenis, the second kavana is kavana lotzeispa. He says there are two different kavanas over here. One kavana is the kavana, the intent on the maisa that you're doing. For example, you're saying Krias Shema, so you have to have kavana, Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. What are the words that you're saying? Shema Yisrael. Here, Klal Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu. Hashem is our God. Hashem Echad. Hashem is one. You have to have kavana on saying Shema. That's what he means when he says the first kavana is kavanas halev la mitzvah atzma. Just kavana to do, to perform the mitzvah that you're performing with meaning. You're benching, bench with kavana. You're saying Krias Shema, say Krias Shema with kavana. That's one kavana. Vishenis, the second kavana is lotzeispa. The second kavana is intent to be mekayim the mitzvah. The Hainu, says the Chavetz Chaim, sheyechavein, that you should have intent lekayim bazeh, to fulfill kasher tziva Hashem, the commandment of the Rebbeinu Shalom. Kamesha kasav abach b'simin ches. So the second kavana is, you're saying Krias Shema, you're supposed to have kavana that by reciting Krias Shema, I am being mekayim the Ratzon HaBoreh. I am being mekayim the Rebbeinu Shalom's tzivui to say Krias Shema. So you hear, we have two different kavanas. One kavana is you're going to have you're going to say Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. You have to have kavana what you're saying. Not that you're spaced out and you're just saying words and you have no idea what you're saying. You have kavana to be mekabel ol malchus shamayim. You say v'ahavta. You have kavana on ahavas Hashem. You say v'hayim shamaya. You have kavana of kabbalas ol mitzvahs. That's one kavana. But you could have all of those kavanas, and according to one shita, you're still not mekayim the mitzvah. Why? Because did you have kavana to be mekayim the mitzvah say of saying Krias Shema? That's a different kavana. So those are the two kavanas that we speak about here. Now, which kavana are we speaking about here in Sif Daled when we say that there's a machlokes hapaiskim, whether or not mitzvahs tzrichas kavana or mitzvahs ain't tzrichas kavana? Which one of these two kavanas is the subject of this machlokes? Says the Mishnah Berurah, the kavanas ha-mitzvah shenizkar b'zeh ha-sif, the kavana that we're speaking about in this sif in Shulchan Aruch, where we're discussing about machlokes ha-paiskim, whether or not mitzvah tzrichas kavana, ain't totally klal b'kavanas halev la mitzvah atzma. We're not talking about the first kavana, the kavana on what you're doing, the kavana to have kavanas halev on the words that you're saying. Sheyichava b'libay mashu moitzi mipiv, meaning that you should have kavana in your mind and in your heart on the words that you're saying. Va'al yahar b'libay l'davar acher, and you shouldn't be distracted thinking about other things. Kigayin b'Kriyas Shema, utfila, or davening Shemona Esrei, or Birkas Hamazon, or benching the Kiddush, or reciting Kiddush on Shabbos, v'chadayma, or other mitzvahs of this type. We're not discussing that kavana over here in Sif Hey. That's not the topic over here in Sif Hey. That's not the topic of this machlokes. For that kavana, everybody agrees that lichatchila, you can't just mumble Krias Shema and have no idea what you're saying. You can't just bench and have no idea that you're thanking the Ribbono Shel Olam for his sustenance. You can't just throw your tefillin on and have no kavana of putting on tefillin yeshabed libay, that you're being mishabed your heart and your mind to the Ribbono Shel Olam. Everybody agrees that lichatchila, you have to have kavana on the meaning of the mitzvah that you're performing. But also everybody agrees, says the Chavetz Chaim, ubedi'eved im loy kivein yotza. But if you're not mechaven on the mitzvah itself, then b'di'eved you are yotza. So if you put on your tefillin and you didn't really have kavana what you're doing, you said Krias Shema and you didn't have kavana what you're saying, except for the first pasuk of Krias Shema, b'di'eved you yotza. Lavad mi pasuk rishon shel Krias Shema, with the exception of the first pasuk of Krias Shema, uberkas avos shel tefillah, and the first bracha of Shemona Esrei, k'may shemavur lekaman, where over there you must have kavanas halev. You must have kavana on those things. So again, we have over here in Sif Daled, the Mechaber introduces to us a machlokes hapaiskim, major machlokes hapaiskim, mitzvah tzrichas kavana or not. Do you have to have kavana when you do a mitzvah in order to be yotze, or you could be yotze even without kavana? Says the Chavetz Chaim, realize that whenever we talk about kavanas by mitzvahs, there's two different kavanas. One kavana is the kavanas halev on the mitzvah that you're being mekayim. You're saying Krias Shema, you have to have kavana to have kavana on the words that you're saying. You put on tefillin, you should have kavana on what you're doing. You bench, you should have kavana on the words to thank the Ribbono Shel Olam for his sustenance. That's one kavana. The second kavana is the kavana to be yotze the mitzvah. You put on tefillin, you should have kavana that you're being mekayim the ratzon habayre, you're being mekayim the tzivui of the Ribbono Shel Olam to put on tefillin. You say Krias Shema, have kavana to be yotze the mitzvah of Krias Shema. Which one is the subject of the machlokes here in Sif Hey? Says the Mishnah Berurah, the second one. The first kavana, that you should have kavana on the words that you're saying, that everybody agrees that lechatchila you have to have that kavana. But b'di'eved, if you did not have that kavana, you're still yotze the mitzvah. The second kavana, that's the machlokes hapaiskim. Says the Mishnah Berurah, rak shemechulakim be'inyan mechayev lechaven kaidem shemaskal mitzvah lotzeis ba'asiyas oisa mitzvah. The machlokes is, when you go to do a mitzvah, do you have to have kavana that I'm doing this to be mekayim a mitzvah? Ula mitzvah min amuvchar kuli al mamoidim d'tzarch kavana. Again, everybody agrees that mitzvah min amuvchar, in order to be mekayim the mitzvah properly, the proper and the best way to be mekayim the mitzvah is certainly, yes, you should have kavana when you say Krias Shema. I'm now having kavana to say Krias Shema, to be Yotze the mitzvah, to be mekayim the tzivui of the Rebbeinu Shalom, to say Krias Shema. And when you get to the end of Krias Shema, to the third parsha, you should have kavana. I have kavana to be Yotze the mitzvah of Zechiras Yitzias Mitzrayim. Everybody agrees that mitzvah min hamuvchar, you should strive to have that kavana. Kedisa bin Nedarim, like those of us who are learning Mishnah Berurah, you see in Masechtas Nedarim Dasamak Beis Amen Aleph, Rebbe Eliezer ben Tzadik Omer, Rebbe Eliezer ben Tzadik said, "Asay dvarim l'shem pa'olam." You should do acts of mitzvah l'shem shamayim. You should have kavana that you're doing it to be mekayim the mitzvah. V'nemar, and we have a pasuk in Yeshaya that decries people that do not have kavana to be mekayim a mitzvah. And the pasuk says, "Vati yerasa ma'isi mitzvahs anashim milumada." When people just do things by rote, the Rebbeinu Shalom decries that attitude and says that that's a highly improper attitude. Certainly, the Rebbeinu Shalom is not interested in people doing mitzvahs by rote. So again, certainly lechatchila, when you do a mitzvah, let's say the mitzvah that we're speaking about, when you say Krias Shema, certainly lechatchila, you should strive to have kavana on the meaning of every word of Krias Shema. And chas v'chalila, you should not be distracted while you're saying Krias Shema and just mumble the words. Lechatchila, you should make sure to have kavana on what you're saying. But, said the Mishnah Berurah, that kavana, it's necessary lechatchila, but b'di'eved, if you did not have kavana, you're still yotze the mitzvah. Here in Sifhei, we have a different machlokes. The machlokes is, when you go to say Krias Shema, do you have to have kavana? I am now going to be mekayim the mitzvahs asay daraisa of Krias Shema. Do you have to have that kavana or not? Says the Mishnah Berurah, mitzvah min hamuvchar, everybody agrees, yes, you should strive to have that kavana. Otherwise, it's like mitzvah nashim milumada. You're just doing mitzvahs by rote. We don't want that. The Rebbeinu Shalom doesn't want that. So lechatchila, mitzvah min hamuvchar, certainly you should have kavana to be mekayim the mitzvah. But that's the machlokes here. There's one shita that says you must have that kavana. If you do not have that kavana, you're not yotze the mitzvah. The other shita says no. B'di'eved, you are yotze the mitzvah even if you did not have that kavana. Says the Mishnah Berurah, yesh oimrim shetzrichos kavana. There's one shita that holds that mitzvahs tzrichos kavana. You must have that kavana. Kavana to be yotze the mitzvah. Says the Mishnah Berurah, v'im loy kivein lotzeis yidei chayvasai b'asiyas ha-mitzvah. This shita would hold, if you did not have this kavana, if you didn't have kavana to be yotze the mitzvah, lo yotze min HaTorah, then midaraisa you're not yotze the mitzvah. V'tzarich lachzor v'la'asoisa, and you would have to do it again. You hear? The first shita that the Mechaber brings down, that's brought down from Taisus and from the Rabbeinu Yoina, holds, if you said Krias Shema, and maybe you had kavana on every word of Krias Shema, but you didn't have kavana that I'm saying Krias Shema to be yotze the mitzvahs asay daraisa, to be mekayim rotzon abayre, to say Krias Shema, you're not yotze, and you have to say it over again. Now, we'll get a little bit more into the details of that halacha l'maisa, but that's what the first shita holds. Mitzvah strichas kavana. Va'afilu, says the Mishnah Berurah, even if safek loyim kivein, even if somebody will have a safek, he'll say Krias Shema, and then afterwards he's besupik. Not sure that I have kavana to be yotze or not. Imu mitzvah daraisa. If we're talking about a mitzvah daraisa like Krias Shema, sveika l'chumra, we have to go l'chumra. Safek daraisa l'chumra. Kain kasav a prima gada b'simin tavkov peites ayin sham. So again, the Mishnah Berurah is saying, according to this first shita, even if you're mesupik, you're not sure if you had kavana or not, you got to go l'chumra. Safek daraisa l'chumra. Say Krias Shema over again. You aren't yotze the mitzvah. V'nira li, but, says the Chavetz Chaim, it appears to him, the lo yivarech az al ha-mitzvah, that you wouldn't make a bracha over again. So, for example, a mitzvah daraisa, right? Daled minim, tefillin. Let's keep it simple. Tefillin, mitzvah daraisa. Somebody went ahead, he made the brachas, he put on tefillin, he even had kavana l'shabed bazeh tayvon samachshavais libeinu la'avaydasai. But he's mesupik whether or not he had kavana that he's putting on the tefillin to be mekayim the mitzvah say of tefillin. No, according to the first shita, this is a mitzvah daraisa, sveika daraisa l'chumra. If you didn't have kavana, you weren't yotze the mitzvah. You got to put on tefillin again. But says the Mishnah Berurah, but don't make the bracha again. And he explains why. He explains it in greater detail later. But here he says, "The balavach yesh kamadeis b'inyan habracha afilu im vaday loikiven barishayna." We're going to see later on Tzadik Daled Amud Aleph that there are those shitas that say that even if you know for sure that you didn't have kavana to be mekayim the mitzvah, you still would not repeat the bracha. So the Mishnah Berurah says, repeat the bracha. That we're not going to do. We're not going to repeat the bracha, but you would have to do the mitzvah over again because mitzvah strichas kavana. And what is this kavana? This is kavana lotzes, kavana to be mekayim the mitzvah. Says the Mishnah Berurah, lefikach. Therefore, based on this, lefikach, hatoikeya lihislamed. Let's say somebody is blowing shofar to practice. Right? He knows he has to blow shofar. It's Rosh Hashanah. And maybe he davens by the first minyan, and by the first minyan is the Baal Tekeya. But he knows that he's going to blow later by the second minyan. So now he gets up Rosh Hashanah morning and he's blowing lihislamed. Levikach hatekei lihislamed. He's blowing to practice. So he didn't have kavanah to be yotze the mitzvah. Oy hamavarich berkas hamazayin im kitanim. Somebody is a rebbe. He's a malamed, and he's benching together with the children. Now the halacha is that when you bench together with children for chinuch purposes, you're allowed to say the Shem Shamayim. You don't have to say Baruch Atah Hashem. And you don't have to go Baruch Atah Ado and look at the kid, finish the word. You're allowed to say the Shem. So this malamed is benching together with the kids. He himself had a tuna-fish sandwich for lunch. So he needs to bench. But right now, he's benching together with the kids to be mekanech the kids. And when he did this, he failed to have kavana that he wants to be yotze his own benching as well. So again, he ate his tuna-fish sandwich. He has to bench, but he also has an achrayus to the kids. He has to bench together with the kids. So he benched together with the kids, but he didn't have kavana that he wants to be yotze benching, that he wants to be yotze his own benching. Or any other mitzvah that you did for whatever reason, but you didn't have kavanah to be yotze the mitzvah, according to this shita, you're not yotze yechiv. And again, you might have benched together with the children, and you might have had kavanah on every word of benching, but you didn't have kavanah to be mekayim the mitzvah. And according to this shita, according to the first Yesh Ibrim in the Shulchan Aruch, in order to be mekayim, according to the second shita in the Shulchan Aruch, you must have kavanah to be mekayim the mitzvah. If not, you aren't mekayim the mitzvah. Vayim betaz b'sim tov peitesh shemuchach b'dvarav da mevarach im kitanim anal lo yotza afilu l'madar mitzvahs ein tzrichas kavana. The Taz takes it a step further. The Taz says the Malamed who ate the two different sandwich is not Yotza if he didn't have kavana, even according to the opinion that holds mitzvahs ein tzrichas kavana, he's still not Yotza. Why? Because it's one thing to say, I didn't have kavana to be Yotza. But over here, the Malamed, it's not only that he failed to have kavana to be Yotza. He had kavana for something else. He had kavana for chinuch. So in that case, the Taz says, even the first opinion, even the Madhyama that holds mitzvahs ain't tzrichas kavana, would hold that you're not Yotza. Because over here, you had befeirish kavana for something else. You had kavana lihislamed. You did not have kavana at all for benching. V'im kavanosai b'asiyas ha-mitzvah l'shum eze inyan v'gam lotzei spayidei ha-mitzvah yotza. But let's say the Malamed had in mind two things. He had in mind to be mekayim the mitzvah of benching for himself, and he also had in mind kavana for chinuch. In that case, that's okay. In that case, then you would be yotza. Okay. So it's very complex over here. So again, we have this machlokes. Mitzvahs tzrichas kavana or mitzvahs ein tzrichas kavana. Very, very, very basic machlokes. The first opinion of the Mechaber says mitzvahs ein tzrichas kavana. B'diavad, if you do a mitzvah and you did not have kavana to be mekayim the mitzvah, you did the act. You might have even had kavanas, like I said, you said Krias Shema, you might have had kavana on every word of Krias Shema. Right? So you were concentrating, but you failed to have kavana that I'm doing this to be mekayim the mitzvah. According to the first shita in the Mechaber, mitzvahs ein tzrichas kavana, you're yotza. It's a b'diavad, but you are yotza. According to the second Mandi Amar, the second shita in the Mechaber, you're not yotza, because you failed to have kavana to be mekayim the mitzvah. Now we go to Tzadik Daled Amud Aleph. Mishnah Berurah is cutting Yud. What did the Mechaber say? The Mechaber said, "V'chein halacha." The Mechaber said that the halacha is like the shita that mitzvahs tzrichas kavana. Very frightening. How many people sit down by davening in the morning, and when they get up to Krias Shema, they pause for a second and they say, "I'm being mechaven to be mekayim the mitzvah of Krias Shema." When you get up to the end of Krias Shema, how many people remember to have in mind, I have in mind to be mekayim the mitzvah of Zechiras Yetzias Mitzrayim. When you put on tefillin, I have in mind to be mekayim the tzivui habeirei to put on tefillin. Mechaber says the halacha is like the second opinion. Mitzvah tzrichas kavana. Now, the Mishnah Berurah that we're going to learn now is going to soften the blow a little bit. He's going to bring down a chayodam who's going to say, well, it really depends on the situation. The chayodam is going to say, if you're in shul and you're davening shachris and you say Krias Shema as part of your davening, then everything that you're doing, the setting, the avirah and the sviva, everything shows that you're going to be mekayim the mitzvah. Why are you there? Why do you come to shul? Why are you wearing tefillin and a talus and sitting down and saying Birchas Krias Shema and saying Krias Shema? Obviously, to be mekayim the mitzvah. So the Chayyadam is going to say that if lefi ha'inyan, if it's muchach lefi ha'inyan, if everybody looks at what you're doing and it's readily understandable based on what you're doing that your intent is to be mekayim the mitzvah, that's called that you had kavanah to be mekayim the mitzvah. Even though in your mind you didn't really think I'm having kavanah to be mekayim the mitzvah, but that's why you got out of bed and came to shul, right? Why did you get out of bed early and get into the car and drive to shul and put on a talus? What was it all about? Obviously, it's to be mekayim all of the mitzvahs that are involved in tefillah. So obviously, it's you came to be mekayim the mitzvah of tefillin, and to be mekayim the mitzvah of Krias Shema, and to be mekayim the mitzvah of Zechiras Yetzias Mitzrayim. the inyan and everything that you're doing is muchach, that's what you're doing. So the Chayyim says that you're yotze anyway. But lechatchila, really, we should have kavana beferish, that I'm about to say Krias Shema, I have kavana to be mekayim tzivoy haboyrei to say Krias Shema. Says the Mishnah Berurah here, Ois Kat Yud, v'chein halacha. So the Mechaber said that the halacha follows the opinion mitzvah strichas kavana, and now the Chavetz Chaim gets into the weeds. All right, so fine, we paskin mitzvah strichas kavana. Now what? Says the Mishnah Berurah. Kasav HaMagen Avram b'Shem HaRadvaz. The Magen Avram writes in the name of the Radvaz. First of all, there's a dafka b'mitzvah daraisa. This is only true, the Magen Avram says, by a mitzvah daraisa. Aval b'mitzvah darabanan, but by a darabanan, Chanukah licht, ein tzarech kavana. By a darabanan, mitzvahs ein tzrichas kavana. Ulefizeh, now, there's a major nafkamina here. Besides, okay, there's a mitzvah daraisa tefillin, there's a mitzvah darabanan of Chanukah licht, so tefillin would need kavana, Chanukah licht would not need kavana, but there's another ramification of this Magen Avram that applies even in the case of a mitzvah daraisa. What is that? Ulefizeh, kol habrachos shehem gam kein derabanan. All of the berachas hamitzvahs are all of derabanan. Levad mi berachas hamazon, with the exception of benching and perhaps berachas HaTorah. Benching and berachas HaTorah could be daraisas, but all other brachas im loy kiven behem lotzeis yotze b'diavad. If you did not have kavana to be yotze the bracha, you're yotze b'diavad because the bracha is a derabanan. And the Magen Avram says a mitzvah derabanan does not require kavana. So that's a ramification even by a daraisa, right? Let's say you're going, this was the shaila that the Mishnah Berurah brought up before. Let's say you put on tefillin and you didn't have kavana. So okay, according to the shita mitzvah strichas kavana, you have to put on tefillin again. But don't make the bracha again. Don't make the bracha again, because the bracha is only a derabanan. However, says the Mishnah Berurah, mikama mekaymes b'shulchan aruch mashma, from many places in the Shulchan Aruch it is implied shu chelik al zeh, that the Mechaber disagrees with this shita of the Magen Avram in the name of the Radvaz. V'chein mibir agra b'sibit taf peites mashma gamkein she'ein lechalik b'mitzvah daraisa l'mitzvah darabanan. From the Gra, it would seem that there is no chiluk between the daraisa and the darabanan, and if we paskin that mitzvah strichas kavana, which is what the Mechaber said, that it applies to a darabanan as well. So tonight, when we go to light the fourth Chanukah licht, we should have kavana. I want to be yotze the mitzvah of hadlakas ner Chanukah. V'dan, you should know the kasav HaMagen Avram l'kaman b'sibit taf pei tesif kat l'ches. The Haftal Shulchan Aruch pasuk lahalacha the mitzvah strichas kavana. Even though it's very clear that the Mechaber paskins mitzvah strichas kavana. V'im kain, and if so, heicha shaloi kiven b'pam rishon tzarich lachsav v'lasis ha-mitzvah. And therefore it comes out that if you did not have kavana to be mekayim the mitzvah the first time you perform the mitzvah, you need to go ahead and you need to do it again. So you had kavana to put on tefillin, you went and you put on tefillin, but you didn't have kavana to be mekayim the mitzvah, you got to put on tefillin again. You said Krias Shema, but you didn't have kavana to be yotze the mitzvah, you got to say Krias Shema again. You took lulav and esrik, but you didn't have kavana to be mekayim the mitzvah, you got to take lulav and esrik again. Afal pikein lo yavarech oid aleha. But, says the Magen Avram, you do not make a bracha again. Shel inyan bracha, because when it comes to a bracha, and you're going to say Shem Shamayim, tzarech lachayish ladasa yesh oimrim she'ein tzarech kavana. We have a yesh oimrim that says that you are yotze the first time, because we have a yesh oimrim that says mitzvahs ain't tzrichas kavana. We know that we're always very, very makpid on suffix brachas. Why? Because of loisis Hashem hashav. We don't want to risk bracha levatala. We don't want to risk being Maisi Shem Shamayim levatala. So over here we have a machlokes. According to one madiyama, you weren't yotze the mitzvah yet, but according to one madiyama, you are. So go ahead and do the mitzvah again, but don't make a bracha again. Vayin b'bir halacha. V'da oid. Furthermore, you should know, says the Mishnah Berurah, and this is the Chayodam that I spoke out, the Kosav Chayodam, the Chayodam writes, B'chlal Samaches Siftes, Demad mitzachinan le'lachsa v'lasis hamitzvah. This that we require you to go perform the mitzvah a second time if you failed to have kavana the first time, because mitzvah tzrichas kavana, hainu b'makom sheyesh litlois, that's only when there's room for us to say she'asiyah harishayna lo'hoisa l'shem mitzvah. That's only when it's reasonable for us to say that the first time you did the mitzvah, you did not do it l'shem mitzvah. Kigoin, for example, b'tekiyah she'hoisa lehislamid. One example that we brought down before was somebody was blowing shofar to practice. No. Over there, it's very easy for us to say that you did not do it l'shem mitzvah, because there's another reason that you're doing it. Everybody looks at you and they say, oh, he's about to kaya. So, okay, if he didn't do it l'shem mitzvah, why was he doing it? Oh, he was doing it l'islamid. He was doing it to practice. So in that case, says the Chayodam, that's when we would say, if you didn't do it with kavana, you got to do it again. Because it's reasonable for us to say that you did it for a different reason, that you did not do it l'shem mitzvah. Or you were saying Krias Shema because you wanted to sit down and learn the Rashis on Krias Shema. So you said every word of Krias Shema, but it's not muchach that you said Krias Shema l'shem mitzvah. It looks to me like you learned Chumash Rashi. So it's not muchach that you said it l'shem mitzvah. So again, you didn't have kavana to be mekayim the mitzvah. You got to say it over again. V'chadoima, or other such cases. But if you were sitting in shul and you said Krias Shema in middle of Birkas Krias Shema as part of the davening, like we always do, v'chein sha'achal matzah, or somebody is sitting by the Seder table, he's wearing a kittel, and there's a ka'ara, and there's matzah, and there's marar, and everything else, and you ate matzah by the Seder table, or you blew shofar in middle of davening, after Shachris, before Musaf, you went in and you blew shofar in shul on Rosh Hashanah in middle of davening, v'nata lulav, or on Sukkos by a Hallel, you went down to the sukkah and you took your lulav and esrig and you made a bracha and you shook lulav. Afal pisha loikiven lotzes, says the Chayodam, even if you know that you did not have kavana specifically to be mekayim the mitzvah, you're yotza anyway. Afal pisha loikiven lotzes yotza. Why? Shaharei mishum zeh oisik yedei lotzes. Why are you doing it? Why are you here? Why did you take a lulav and esrig and go down to the sukkah before Hallel and make a bracha and shake it? Why did you put on tefillin in shul this morning? Why did you say Krias Shema in the middle of Birkas Krias Shema? Why did you listen to shofar on Rosh Hashanah in the middle of Rosh Hashanah davening? That's why you did it. You did it lotzes. Shaharei mishum zeh oisik yedei lotzes. Afal pi she'ena mechav. Even though b'shas ma'isa you didn't have that specific kavana. Ad kan l'shoynai. Or Ritzayna Loimar, and the Chofetz Chaim says what the Chayodam wants to say is, Heicha shemuchach lefio inyan, when everything surrounding what you're doing proves shasiyasi hu kedei lotzes, that your performance of the mitzvah is in order to be yotze the mitzvah, afal pi shaloi kiven beferish, even though you didn't have beferish das, that you're doing it to become the mitzvah, yotze, you're yotze. And to me, what the Chayodam is saying is really very simple. I don't have to have. It's a little bit like what we learned when we learned Hilchos Tefillin. We learned by Hilchos Tefillin that you're not allowed to be Mesiach Das from Tefillin, and we spoke out many times, and the Mishnah Berurah himself said it, that what does it mean that you're not allowed to be Mesiach Das from tefillin? Does it mean that every second that you're wearing your tefillin, you have to be thinking, I'm wearing tefillin, I'm wearing tefillin, I'm wearing tefillin, I'm wearing tefillin? Really? How are you going to have kavana by Krias Shema? You're going to be Mekabel all Malchus Shemayim? You're busy thinking, I'm wearing tefillin, I'm wearing tefillin, I'm wearing tefillin. You're going to have kavana by Shemona Esrei? You're in the middle of thinking, I'm wearing tefillin, I'm wearing tefillin, I'm wearing tefillin, I'm wearing tefillin. No. You put on tefillin, you're wearing tefillin. Now, you're davening. While you're davening, that's not called being Mesiach Das from tefillin. Being Mesiach Das from tefillin is when you do something or you think something that's antithetical to tefillin. If you stop davening and you go outside and you drink a coffee and you joke around with your friends, schoik v'kalos roish, that's antithetical to tefillin. So now you are Mesiach Das from tefillin. Yeah, you get distracted. Hirurim rayim chas v'chalila. That's antithetical to tefillin. You're Mesiach Das from tefillin. So what does it mean that I have to have kavana to be mekayim the mitzvah? It doesn't necessarily mean, says the Chai Adam, that b'shas ma'isa when you go to put on the tefillin, I have to have das right at that moment. I am putting on the tefillin to be mekayim tzivoy abayre shetzivanu lohaniach tefillin. No, I came to shul for that. I had that kavana. Why am I coming? I'm coming because I'm a from Yid and I got to put on tefillin and I got to daven and I got to say Krias Shema. I am coming to be mekayim my chiyuvim. That's my avodas Hashem. I got up this morning and I'm coming. Kom la'avodas habayre, right? I got up to go out to be mekayim avodas habayre, to go to put on talsit tefillin, to go daven. As part of that is to say Krias Shema. Part of that is to be Maski Yitzias Mitzrayim. Part of that is to be Mekayim either the mitzvah D'Rabbanan or D'Oraisa of Tefillah. So I don't necessarily have to have the freilich das every step of the way. That's what this Chai Adam is saying. Avol bistama bevadei lo yotza. But if you do a mitzvah stam, where the Indian is not muchach, and where they bring up a shaila is somebody who's saying Krias Shema early, right? Somebody's davening a late minyan and he's saying Krias Shema early. Or, probably more common, somebody davened Ma'ariv early. You made early Shabbos. And now you're saying Krias Shema again, later, bizman. Over there, the Indian is not muchach. So over there, you have to have beferish kavana. Because over there, the Indian is not muchach. So, bistama, if you do a mitzvah stam, bevadei lo yotza, kedisa b'taisis sukkah. But now, says the Mishnah Berurah, but you should know v'chol zel ini b'di'evid. But this is still all b'di'evids. Lechatchila, aval lechatchila, vadai tzarich li zoher. We certainly have to take care, says the Chavetz Chaim, lechavein koidim kol mitzvah, to have kavana before the performance of any mitzvah, lotzeis yedei chayvas ha-mitzvah. To be mekayim our obligation to perform the mitzvah. To be mekayim rotzen and tzivoy abayre. Lechatchila, we must have that kavana. The words of the Chai Adam notwithstanding, we should try for sure, before we say Krias Shema, to have kavana, I'm saying Krias Shema, to be yotze the mitzvah, to be mekayim the tzivoy abayre. When I put on tefillin, I should have kavana that I'm doing it to be mekayim the tzivoy abayre. V'chein ha'etiku kol ha'achreinim b'sifreiim, ayin b'Chai Adam b'chlach chafalaf v'b'derech ha'chai b'chos Krias Shema u'v'maiseh rav. So again, just to wrap it up, we have a machlokes over here, mitzvah strichas kavana or mitzvah ein strichas kavana. The machlokes is negeya to the kavana to be mekayim the mitzvah. One man Yomar holds it's not necessary. B'di'evet, if you didn't have kavana to be yotze the mitzvah, b'di'evet you yotze anyway. The second man Yomar says no. If you failed to have kavana to be mekayim the mitzvah, even if you had kavana on the mitzvah itself, you had kavana in every word of Krias Shema, you had kavana in every word of benching, but you didn't have kavana to be mekayim the mitzvah, you're not yotze. The mechaber paskins like that, second shita. So lechatchila, everybody agrees you have to have such a kavana. The Mechaber paskins like the Mandiyama that says that b'diavad you're not yotze without that kavana. The Chayodam says that if the setting, if the inyan is muchach, that you're here to be mekayim the mitzvah, so then b'diavad you're yotze the mitzvah, even if you did not have beferish kavana to be yotze the mitzvah. Okay, very good. Beautiful sugya over here, and there are beautiful bir halachas over here that go into this in much greater detail. I would urge everybody, if they have time, to take a look at the bir halachas. I'm very tempted to go through some of them. We'll see. But in any case, right now we're going to stop here. Freilichen Chanukah, thank you so much for joining me for limid HaTorah. The schus of limid HaTorah should be megan against Klal Yisrael. The Rebbe Shem should send Yeshua's and first parnaset sheduchim to all those in need. We should be zeicher to see the Bias Kal Tzedek. B'meherav Yameinu Amen. Be well.